so we're checking out your turn-in for assignment 8 in VGD 151. So we've got, the assignment was to create a simple animation that was different from the one in the text, utilizing the concepts of squash and stretch. So while we do have some stretching and some squashing going on in this animation, it's actually not quite applied correctly, okay? So what I'm going to do today is just show you, a different way that we might tackle this to make the animation seem a little more realistic and snappy, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and grab our little checker piece here, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my keyframes for now, and we'll just kind of start fresh here, alright, with our checker piece. So I'm going to go to keyframe number 3 here, just right click and hold. I'm going to just get rid of that keyframe. Same thing with keyframe 6, 12, whoops. Got a little overexcited with clicking there. We'll get rid of that. And 24, I'm just going to go ahead and leave 24 right where it's at for now. We can change it later if we want to for any reason, alright? So I'm going to start with frame 1 here. Now, obviously we want our checker piece to kind of travel in a nice arc up here and come down and land over here on the other side of the checkerboard, okay, where it's at 24, alright? So we've got it moving in the right direction, so that's a start. But one thing that you might want to kind of consider along the lines of squash and stretch, which is what we're looking at, is if we want to make this checker piece kind of look like it's moving on its own, kind of like it's got a little life to it, what we can do to convey that before it starts coming upwards in this arch is to actually make it move in the opposite direction first, okay? So generally, in animation, we have to kind of prepare our audience to view what's about to happen. And the way we do that is through some really subtle movements that happen just before our main movement, okay, that are generally in the opposite direction of the main movement. So, for example, when you have a baseball player who's about to throw the ball, you have this complex series of movements beforehand where he's winding up and getting ready to pitch, okay, and he's moving his arm back before he actually executes the pitch, where his arm moves forward for the throw, okay? So that's kind of an example of that sort of thing, where we're moving things in the opposite direction of the main movement that we want to show beforehand, okay? Hope that makes sense. I'm going through it a little quickly, but as you kind of see it in action, I hope it'll make a little more sense for you there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a squash at this point, alright? And right now I have my movement across the board starting right at frame 1. For my squash, I want this to happen just a little bit before the chess piece or checkers piece starts moving across the board, okay? So I actually want to move this keyframe up just a little bit in time to give me a little bit of time to perform this kind of pre-action, alright? So what I can do is use my middle mouse button here, or excuse me, if I hold shift first, okay, and click on this, alright, my keyframe here, while holding shift, then I get this red kind of box, and I can use my middle mouse button to click and drag this frame, alright, I'm going to set it on frame 5 for now, Okay, so essentially what I've done is just moved frame 1, that key that I had on frame 1, over to frame 5. And again, you know, that was just by holding down Shift and left clicking, then middle mouse dragging, right? You just use your middle mouse button or scroll wheel to just click and drag. So I'll just set that down there and just click off of it to deselect it. Alright, so now I have a little room to work with right here where I can put in that beforehand motion. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and grab my scale tool in anticipation for this move that I'm going to make. And you know, before I get too into it, I'm going to look at it from the side for a moment here. Now, you can see at this point, this is actually floating a little bit above my my checkerboard here, okay? So, you know, we want to make sure that at the beginning it's going to be starting right on that checkerboard. Alright, so I'm going to move that down a little bit. I'm on frame 1 here. And then I'm also, now that I've kind of got it where I want it to be, more or less. Maybe I got a little too excited there. There we go. That's a little closer. I'm going to also go ahead and freeze my transformations on this. Alright? What that's going to do is it's going to set all of these values to 0. Alright? And it's going to set all my scale values to 1. And basically that means that any time that I need the checker piece to return to this position and this exact shape, all I have to do is come over here and put in 0s and 1s. Now, you know, if I do that right now, it's going to wind up somewhere totally different because, you know, we kind of had a different home base established for it right there, and that's going to be just kind of right in the center of the world. So we want this area that we've established here to be kind of its new point of origin, its new home base, alright, that we can always return to whenever we want. So I'm going to come up here to modify. I make sure I have my checker piece selected before I do this. And I'm going to come to freeze transformations. There we go. Click on that. Alright, so it doesn't want to do it. And that's because I've already got some keyframes going on here. Alright. So ideally this is something you want to establish before you start animating. Alright. So, you know, no big deal. It just means I need to start my animation from scratch. I'm going to just go ahead and get rid of these keyframes that I've got. We'll just delete those for now. I'm going to move my checker piece over to where I want it to start. Right here is probably fine. Check it from the side, make sure I get it right onto that checkerboard. So that looks about right. Okay, now I can freeze my transformations because I don't have any animation keyframes going into it at this point. Okay, so modify, freeze transformations. You can see this is all snapped to 0s in the translate and rotate boxes and 1s in the scale boxes. Okay, that means no matter where, you know, I take this thing, if I rotate it around, I scale it, I do all kinds of crazy stuff with it later, I can very easily just come here and, you know, if I'm looking at this and going, I don't know where I went wrong, it looks crazy, and, you know, I just want it to go back to the way it was, we can just come here and put in a simple 0, 0, 0, and then our scale, we can scale it back to 1 at 1 to get back our original shape and our original position, our original rotation. Okay, so it's a good thing to double check before you start animating where you've got your kind of center of origin. Alright. Another thing with this particular animation, when we scale this guy down, all right, in anticipation for that jump that it's gonna make, if we scale it the way it is now, so for example, I put in scale Y here, 0.5, you know, it scales in, but you can see it's also scaled off of the ground here, all right? It's kind of jumped off of the ground because everything is being scaled down in towards this center point, all right? So we don't actually want this thing to leave the ground at all until it performs its jump. So we're going to actually move this pivot point down to the bottom here, okay? And that's going to change the way it scales. So let's go ahead and do that. What I can do is just hold down the D key, all right? That's D as in dog. And then I'll get this, all right? And then also hold down the V key. V stands for vertex, all right? So you're holding down both the D key and the V key at the same time. And then you can just left click and drag. And this is going to now snap to any vertex that you want it to snap to. The vertex that I'm going to choose is actually, you know, you can't see it from this angle, but it's right here. It's going to be the vertex that is on the bottom in the center of this checkerboard piece. Right, you can kind of see right here where it's at, right? Where all these edge loops join in the center on the bottom. If we look at it from the side, okay, so you can see now this center of the handle is no longer up here in the middle, it's down here on the bottom. Now at this point, when we use our scale tool, we can see, you know, it has scaled down, but it's all scaled down towards this center point. So the bottom of the checker piece at this point has stayed on the ground. All right, so that's good. So we've kind of got our scale tool working how we would like it to for now. So the first thing we want to do, because at the beginning of this animation, this thing hasn't begun moving yet. All right, it should just be totally zeroed out, all ones, just looking normal. It hasn't started moving yet. We just want to go ahead and set a key here. And we can do that just by hitting the S key on the keyboard for set key. That will set every last one of these values. Or I'm just going to hit Z to go back and undo. All right. Or I can select individual values if I want, just by grabbing them here. And I can right-click and hold and hit key selected if I only want to key a few things at a time. All right. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and key all of these. We can delete these keys later if we don't need them. All right. For now, we'll just start with that just to give us a starting point. I'm going to move this forward just a little bit, maybe to about 5. Okay. This is where I'm going to start scaling this down and out to kind of anticipate this jump that we're going to make. All right. So I'm going to go to something like, you know, why not? Let's do 0.5. Scale it down. Okay, so the time that we scale it down in one direction, we're going to have to scale it outwards in other directions, all right? Because this checkerboard piece needs to look like, even though it's squashing, that it's retaining its same volume and its same mass, okay? So basically, you can think of it as a water balloon. If you have a water balloon and you squish it down, it doesn't just get smaller, it just shortens in one direction, gets shorter in one direction, but all that water that's inside the balloon has to go somewhere, all right? So it goes out around the sides, all right? So the the water will go outwards and expand. Okay, so you have to kind of keep that in mind whenever you're using squash and stretch, that if you're squishing an object in one direction, it's also going to go outwards in other directions to retain its mass and volume, okay? So I've changed these values to 1.2, 0.7, and 1.2 respectively, okay? And it looks like I'm actually still on frame 1 here, so let me change that back to frame 5. Sometimes when you use the undo button, Z, okay, you might accidentally jump to an old frame, so kind of watch out for that. So I'll just type those in again, 1.2, 0.7, and 1.2. Alright, and I'll go ahead and grab those 3, since they're the only ones that I changed, and I'll just key those, okay? Key those values. So now we've got it slowly squishing down, right? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to take a look at is actually going to be closer to the end, alright? I'm going to go with about frame 20 here, okay? And I'm just going to work with the translation for now. Where do I want this thing to end up at the end, okay? So I'm going to go with my move tool here on frame 20, and I'm going to move it over here. So eventually I want this thing to wind up over here, just landing right there, okay? Okay, so once I've done that, I can go ahead and grab these translate values, hit key selected, okay? So at this point we have it squishing down, getting ready to move over in this direction, alright? Okay, so one thing you might notice is that it's starting to move a little too early. It shouldn't start moving till 5, okay? That's because I haven't really made a key for translation at frame 5 yet, alright? So it's just kind of starting off at 1 and translating over to 20. So there's an easy way to deal with those kind of problems, alright? Once you see them, you can just come up to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, and here we can see all the different inputs that we have here in sort of a visual color representation, okay? So for this, we're working with our translation, right? The problem here is that it's moving in a certain direction too soon, okay? So let's take a look at our translation here. Okay, so this green line represents translate Y. We can see there's no change happening there at all, so that's not going to be the problem. Translate Z has some information. Translate X has some information as well. Okay, so it's starting right here and it's gradually coming over here. This just represents that at frame 1, you can see the number of the frame down here on the bottom. It's starting in this 0 position, and by the time it reaches frame 20, it's in its new position, okay? So we want that movement to begin on frame 5 instead of frame 1. And we can do that pretty easily just by grabbing this first keyframe here, okay? We can just marquee select it, and we can actually move it over, okay? Just like that, just clicking and dragging. So I'm going to move it to frame 5 here, which is kind of indicated by my red line. It says 5. That's where my time slider is at right now. So just move that. And when I did that, you know, I didn't get it exactly perfect. I wound up moving things up and down along the graph. So it's important to come back in and clean that up. I want this to be at 0, 0, and 0. Okay? So we can look at our graph now. Alright, so there's no movement going on in any direction before frame 5 at this point. So now if we take a look at our animation, squishing down and the movement begins at frame 5. Okay, over to frame 20 where it's done moving and it just sits there. Now, obviously checker pieces don't just slide across and through other checker pieces. We want this thing at some point to come up and jump over this other checker piece, okay? So somewhere in the middle here, I'll go with frame 13. We want this to move up, okay? And reach kind of the peak of its jump, okay? So we'll just move it up a little bit to wherever we want it to be. And we can go ahead and key that, alright? So we'll key that movement right here on translate Y is what we have moved, okay? So key selected, translate Y. So let's see what we've got now. It's squishing down, it's jumping up, there it is, up high, and coming back down again and landing on 20, okay? So we've got kind of the basic motion that we want, but we still don't really have much going on in the squash and stretch department. So we've got it squashing down before it's jumping, and when it's in the middle of its jump, it should actually stretch out at that point, okay? Just a little bit, just to show how fast it's moving and jumping, okay? So I'll go with something like maybe about 8, okay? And this is where we're going to start seeing that stretch happen, okay? So you can imagine for the squash we have, you know, scale X and scale Z being a little larger, all right, than scale Y, which is scaled down. So for a stretch, we're going to do the opposite, where we're going to scale down scale X and scale Z, and we're going to scale up in scale Y. Okay, so now we have a nice little stretch going on, okay? So let's go ahead and key those values. Key selected. And we'll see what we've got now. Okay, it's squishing down, jumping up, stretching out a little, and it continues to stay stretched like that, since we haven't really keyed our scale on any other of these keys so far, okay? I think I'll actually stretch it out just a little more. Do something like 1.4. And we'll set those keys. Okay, so at the top of its jump, that bounce motion is no longer really affecting it, and gravity hasn't really set in yet. So at this point, it should generally return to its original shape at the top of a jump, okay? So we'll change those all back to 1s to indicate that original shape that we had, and we'll just key those. So we'll see what we've got now. Squishing down, jumping up, returning to its original shape. So it's gotten probably a little small for this one. You know, and this is just a thing that you do. I'm just eyeballing things, seeing what looks good. So, you know, you can change these multiple times if you decide something else looks better, some different values. You know, try different things with these. Squishing down, jumping up, turning to its original shape. And then at this point, you can either stretch it out again or leave it in its original shape, depending on how quickly it's moving. I'm going to stretch mine out. See what my previous values for stretching were. 0.8, 1.5, and 0.8. So I'll keep that kind of consistent here. We'll create a key for that. And at 20, it lands. Okay. So at this point, upon landing, it should return to its original shape. And we'll key those. And then because it's hit the ground with some force, it will actually squish down a little bit from that impact, okay? So maybe here at about 22, we can squish it again. And then after it has, after that initial impact, then it's going to bounce back to its original shape, okay? So let's see, 1.2. I'm gonna make sure that I have that on frame 22 when I do that. 1.2, 0.7, 1.2. So there's my squash on frame 22. And then back to its original shape again on frame 24. So let's see what it's looking like now. So we've got this squash, stretch, back to its original shape, stretching again as it's falling down, hitting the ground, and squashing again before returning to its original shape. Forgot to key that last one, so let me key that right now. Okay. So it's already looking, you know, a lot better. One other thing that you might want to play with is also the rotation, okay? So maybe after it's taking off here, because it's traveling in this direction, we may want to change the rotation a little bit. So I'll key the rotation here before we start moving. And, maybe I'd like to rotate it a little in the direction that it's moving, roughly, okay? And we can key that. So now it's doing something like that. And as it's at the top of its bounce here, we might change our rotations back to normal. That's just zeros in these boxes to change things back to normal. Then as it's going this way, we might rotate it in this direction to kind of lead it into where it's going, okay? And I'll key those. And of course when it hits the ground, we want it to be back to normal. So that's going to be zeros again. And key that. So let's see how it looks now. Okay, so you can see we've got this really nice squashing and stretching motion going on. It's a little fast at the moment because we've only put it over 24 frames, which is, roughly 1 second of animation. But you can see as we go through it how much life it really gives our animation when we make these small adjustments, okay? You can check this out in the graph editor too, where you can really tweak different things about your animation, like your translate Y, for example. If you really want to have something very snappy, you can change your translate Y a little bit, because at the moment it's just kind of slowly curving upwards and slowly curving downwards, okay? And what that does is, what that basically means is that it's slowly beginning this jump, okay? And it's picking up speed here and slowing down at the top of the arc, picking up speed as it's falling, and then it's actually slowing down a little bit before it hits the ground. Now, of course, we know that in real life things don't slow down before they hit the ground. They just keep going faster and then they hit the ground, okay? So, we might want to adjust this a little bit. We can grab this and grab this little handle here, and we can actually move this up a bit to make it sort of a sharper curve, so it's not really smoothing out at the bottom. The effect that will have is meaning that this speed that the ball has, or the checker piece in this case has, is not slowing down as it comes into meet with the ground there, okay? So let's check that out. It'll be kind of a minute difference. You might not be able to detect it at first, but it'll really help your animation look a lot snappier in the end. Okay, so that's it for this video. I hope you found that helpful. Let me know if you have any questions about anything that we went over in the video today. Thanks for watching, and happy animating!